very much. There's your clicker. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Actually, it was the largest pilots, not just pilot studies, but actually to see much of the uncertainties that we heard in the previous presentation. How do you actually work with that and learn in a very iterative and agile way while buying and building your organization? So thank you for the introduction and also for the context of having, the city of Kristiansund here with the mayor and with the CEO. I think this is exactly what we need to be looking at. I represent OASK, also the Kingdom of Denmark, which is very close to Norway. And yes, I'm an academic, but I'm also involved in creating standards that helps cities and communities buy things on the right terms. And as you said so rightly, the buying power of the local public sector is immense. In Europe, it's about a quarter of the GDP. It's massive. So even if we manage to get some good ideas into those standard contracts on the European level, but certainly this is why we're here in Delhi, on the global level, we can help cities and communities of all sizes in buying stuff they don't regret later when they want to reach their goals. So I'm going to give some little bit of background, but then also some very concrete examples from the ground from some of these pilots. Just to be very concrete, this is the city hall in my hometown of Aarhus, and just as an example of how we have been using the actual physical city also to display how well we are doing. On the City Hall Tower, this is a couple of years ago, there are some small dots, and there is an app which every citizen could use to report things they felt were not working. But it wasn't just about holes in the street. It was also about the quality of the education or other issues. It was really everything in one app, and usually you have one for the trash, you have one for the social services, you have another one, and so on. Why? Because it's just data, and the citizens are the same, no matter what the problem is. Now, the difficult thing is not to make an app. The difficult thing is not to put LEDs on City Hall Tower. The difficult thing is to get permission to do it, because what the dots show is how efficiently the city responds to the needs of the citizens. And that created some uncertainty inside of City Hall on the political level, not so much actually they liked it, but on the administrative level, because are we equipped to have this real-time eye-to-eye interaction with our citizens showing? And the thing is, the longer it took for the city to respond, or the more back and forth in the communication, the higher up the balls went. And on the other side of the street is the local newspaper, so they could, really keep track at the same pace as the citizens. So just to say, we have done tons and tons of these things, and usually it's not the technology. It's either the legislation or it's the organization which is there. And then, of course, another thing which you also pointed out, it's uncertainty. You don't know what is the right thing. And even if in Denmark and Norway there's okay resource compared to so many other parts of the world, but still, there's not unlimited resource. You have to prioritize. So if you think something is important as a goal, how do you ensure that you get to that goal? Whether it's social targets or it's environmental targets or other targets. So we have been trying to help. Yes, so much of this happens to be a trade-off between how much you want to be hands-on in terms of regulation and upfront setting, this is how we should do things, be very structured, and hands-off and letting the actors in society and in the market and even within the public administrations innovate. And we see very big differences globally on how this is treated. The point is that as a mayor, as a civil servant, actually as anyone in society, you need not just to have agency, the ability to act. it must be legitimate agency. You are either elected or you are acting as a citizen, even if you're a company, together with your fellow citizens. So what is, your base is not just to be the biggest and the strongest, but also to act on certain terms. You talked about labor conditions, but there are so many others. I mean, you cannot just pollute because there will be someone else who needs to clean up after you and so on. So legitimate agency is what every local administration must seek. And there's really not a lack of literature out there, or guides. You can find national guides. I don't have the Norwegian one because I don't think there is one in this domain, but Denmark, Sweden, other parts around the world, the EU stuff, the global stuff from the UN system, and tons of commercial. And you get them, and so, here's what we should do. We did it, and we came up with the essence, which is the title of this talk, minimal interoperability. So you need to be able to connect systems, but not over-connect them so that you get locked into one ecosystem, or if something bad happens, then it creates an effect that, an attack takes down the whole system, so it cannot also be over-connected, but also not under-connected. And this has led to this standard of minimal interoperability. Of course, what you want to do is you want to reach your goals, as we just saw, and we have the SDG zone over there. And then you have all these means, technologies to do that. And of course, there is a market. You can buy things, you can build them internally. But basically, how do we get from all the technology to all your goals? It's a little bit similar to what we saw before. How do you get from what you wish to do in real action, and how do you make it actionable? Now, this is a very technology-oriented perspective, because at some point, there has to be a system that you buy or build. Essentially, what you want to ensure is there's a protection of your citizens, of your society, of everyone's data and so on, but you don't want to stop innovation. So you also want to be efficient and have a thriving economy on your terms. And what we did from the Danish side is that we created this guide. It's available in English as well, and it's called the Guide for Sustainable Digital Transformation, with 7 very simple principles or recommendations. The first one is focus on data. When it came out, it's a couple of years back, 21, many were saying, data, is it so important? I think everyone agrees that's probably what you need to do first. Ensure that you know where your data is and where it's going and where it should not go. Build with interfaces, meaning don't always buy full end-to-end systems, but create interfaces between systems so that you can change your provider or your system, or if something fails, you can switch to another one. And then the third one that I'm going to talk about, secure a minimum of interoperability. Meaning, so systems should not just in principle be able to interoperate, because it might take 5 years to make it work in practice. But there needs to be something like, the USB-C or the Wi-Fi, which really everybody understands and can be used. So, how do we come to common terms on what is the minimal common ground? This is what we have defined internationally. And there's this report backed by 19 of the UN agencies, formulated by ITU and tons of colleagues, and actually in the realm of the UFRSSC, which we just heard about now. So it's really meant to support how do you then meet your actual goals. And here's the recommendation. Well, it's longer than this, but this is the name. It's called Y4505, formerly known as YMIM, for Minimal Interoperability Mechanisms. And it's really a way to ensure that what you buy meets a minimum criteria so that you can keep the option to change. So it's similar to your minimal labor, terms that must be in place. Here it's just the technology that your provider, whoever it is, someone local, even some internal, or someone on the other side of the ocean, they should still live up to this minimum. It's just been approved. in July, so it's not out there. Actually, you can go to some of the very large providers and ask for this, but you need to do it. So there needs to be a decision in City Council and probably also on the national level. In EU, it will be on the EU level to say we really want this. You cannot go below. You cannot cheat and say, oh yeah, we heard about it. We can give you something similar. No, 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 no. It has to be this. We know this from food safety. We know it from product safety. We know it from social safety. There has to be some firm terms. So we have started that from the view from a local administration. So you know how many local administrations are in the world? 500,000. 80,000 around is in Europe, and I'm going to joke a little bit, but a third is in Italy or France. No, I mean, of course, there are different sizes. In Denmark, my home country of 5 million, there is around 100 municipalities. So the point is actually not how big your community or your city is. This works for everybody that needs to serve a local community. It even serves the needs of informal communities. There are not so many informal, I saw it on the slide you had on the dashboard before. Informal settlements is not a big thing in the Nordics. It's a very, very big thing in the world. This serves everyone, from the well-resourced to the not so well-resourced. I won't go into the details, but there's certain things you must have. You must explain why does this mechanism exist, what can it do, how can it help, and there's conformance and compliance, like you would normally have. And there's MIMs for all kinds of things, for data access, for security, for AI, for geospatial, for digital twins, personal data, wow. But it's the same point. There is a minimum that you must provide in terms of interoperability. So that if you have things in the cloud, you can actually switch your cloud provider. That's probably a concern in many organizations. We have some more work items coming up based on this, but this was the current work. I'm now going to use the rest of the time to give some very concrete examples from local administrations who are piloting now these principles technically in their very, very practical needs solving for citizens. And of course, this is not something you do one city alone. You do it with your peers, like in the U4SSC network. And this is all from Europe, so it happens under the policy framework of the digital decade. And there is a recognition that we have great research, we have actually lots of money, but we are very bad at transferring the good ideas into the actual operations of daily life in a city, or in the country, or wherever. So Europe, the European countries went together and set some money there to actually drive this forward. So that's a sizable pot. So first I will give examples of data spaces. Probably this is not a term which is super well known, but very soon it will be a law in Europe when you treat data on behalf of others, including in municipalities, that your systems must simply adhere to the data space standards. And it's coming extremely fast at us. I think sometimes one of the biggest concerns is the speed of this. But this is going to be legislation in Europe, and it's going to be based on standards, which do not yet exist. But they will exist a year from now. So just examples on how we have been piloting and trialing to see in an agile way what would be the right types of standards to make. Because otherwise we just stop everything. We saw when we had personal data protection legislation coming in Europe, that was a tough one. It was good for the lawyers. Many lawyers got extra hours, but for people who actually just wanted to get, things solved, it created some problems. You couldn't share a lot of data that you usually could share. But it was, attention call that this is important. Again, I won't go into the details, but just to say, we already have data spaces. We have data flowing around from, low velocity data, which is in archives, to high velocity data, which could be the IoT sensors you have for environment or roads or whatever. And you collect that on the local level, on the municipal level or some other level. Same, you aggregate that sometimes on the national level, and in EU, you then create these EU-level data spaces. And they're coming for all kinds of things, for the green, for mobility, for health, and so on. And on top of that, you can apply artificial intelligence, you can deliver services, you can create twins and sandboxes and cityverse and so on. But it's the minimal interoperability that makes it not super dangerous to do. Yeah, we can always talk more about the technicalities, but just as an example, or not just as an example, but as documentation, there are quite a number of data spaces coming up. Yes, and I mean, this is in a way where it all starts. You remember, recommendation number 1 is focus on data. Know how your data flows, because data is very much like water. Every municipality has water treatment and separates wastewater from, fresh water, and surface water from groundwater, and it's quite important. With data, I mean, we know it's important and we try to manage it, but we don't have the same, shall we say, 10,000 or 8,000 years of experience in managing it. We have 8,000 years of experience managing the water flow. But the data is very similar in the sense that it needs to be managed. And you cannot just outsource it. It has to be something that's connected to your legitimate agency. So data spaces are connected to digital twins and the other stuff. The reason why I wanted to show this is that there's a really good opportunity to get involved if you want to pilot some of these things. There is tons of cities doing this already, and there's an open call, and there's lots of money that you can take part of if you're in Europe in this case. Similar situation with AI. We have an action where we have 100 small pilots with marginalized communities trying to see what new technologies can and cannot do. Because normally we design for the mainstream. We design for people like me because it's easier. But what happens if we design for the fringes, for the marginalized communities? And this is what we're doing here. So and 100 pilots, sizable. You start to see some patterns, what can be done. So it's small pots of money and experts and tools and sandboxes and so on, where you can go out and do things in reality. Again, lots of cities engaging. 2 examples. This is an AI interpreter for status holders. So if you're a non-native citizen or a non-citizen, but you have a status of some kind, you actually still need the same services. And very often for a municipality, it's easy to provide services for those who grew up around the corner, but it's less easy for those who traveled across the globe to come and help out with work or for family reasons. So how can we use these new tools to deliver services also to these status holders which are not citizens by culture? Just an example. This is from Amsterdam. Another one is loneliness. It's a huge problem in many communities. And I mean, it's not about having a chatbot so you can chat to someone just because you're lonely, but it's around the kind of activities that can still be interesting. Like you do crosswords. There are actually more interactive things to do. So here's a community group that's using new tools and services for setting up the way that they think are helpful. So it's a way to be not naive about what communities need. There's a lot of technical stuff happening behind, but the minimal interoperability is kind of the link between them. And there's tons of tools and sandboxes and so on that you can find on the community website. Digital twins. So that's when you have your data, you create models. I come from a technical modeling background, so for me that's like breathing to talk about models, but that's what you do. When you have data, you model them. It's a citizen. It can have kids, it can have a home, it can have an address, and that's a model. And when that model includes the physical world, normally we call them digital twins. And local digital twins are digital twins for local administrations. Every local administration in the developed economies have them, but they're not integrated easily into an SDG framework or policy framework where the politicians can go and ask the civil servants, what happened if we did this? We are starting to get these simulation tools, but they're still very limited to roads or so on, and still they can't take in, so what would be the negative social consequences if we close this road or if we build a new road? The mayor could come and ask for that, and then the civil servant would say, come back in 6 months and I'll give you a report. But the mayor's children could sit in a SimCity-like environment and do this. They just don't have the data. So we need to close that gap. And their city is already doing that, of course. One case is to have positive energy districts. So to have energy districts that do not consume more or pollute more and send out more greenhouse gases than they take out. And there's some quite nice examples in Aarhus in Denmark and in Chipsala in a neighborhood in Riga in Latvia. And again, it's of course quite complicated, but it's possible because of the minimal interoperability that makes it possible to put different systems together. And there you can scale, you can put the slider, the neighborhood Gellerup. If you're from Denmark, you know this is a kind of, it has a negative ring. It's a troubled neighborhood. But this is where this is happening. It's happening for real. The energy positive target is set very ambitiously by the city of Aarhus. And the mayor went out a decade ago and said, we will have this by 2030. Maybe we'll be a year too late, but then we will have it. But it's not so that it only works on the neighborhood level. It also works on the district, the municipality level, on the national and on the EU level. So you can set the slider where you want, and you still, as long as you have the data, you can actually make these optimizations across agencies, across private sector providers, and across the different geographical territories. Then, building on that, when you have these digital twins, they start becoming like alternate realities. This is what we call metaverse globally. In Europe, it's called cityverse because they're citizen-centric, not city-centric, but citizen-centric. And what happens is that many cities have these possibilities where you can, calculate how many solar panels you can put, and it will be so and so in effect. But it's becoming also an environment that you can experience. And you need to be delivering services using these spaces. This is from the city of Rotterdam. They have the digital city as a strategic program, and they're one of the most, innovative and advanced that I know of. Using it from everything from safety to visualizing the new zoning laws. And many cities have bits and pieces of this, or local administrations, but putting it together in a modular way is cheaper, safer, and it's easier to change if you change your mind. And you will change your mind because the world is not easy to predict. So this is how we have been building systems for decades. For each silo, for each department in the city, you build a single purpose service, and then that was great. But the problem is that there are so many things they have in common that is maybe just the last 10% of data and the 10% of legislation and 10% of manning, personnel that is different. 70% same. Now, why don't you just put all of that in one big system and push a button and make AI optimize it all? Well, think about the clean water and the wastewater and the privacy and so on. It's not so easy to keep things aside if you just put them into a large model. You need to still be able to account for where does this data come from. If it went wrong, who do we fire? Who do we sue? Who do we complain to? So it has to be, this is why this is such a resilient and time-tested model. But it has some drawbacks, as we all know. We actually want these single-purpose systems built on some of the same layers. Now, how do you then today define these layers? Well, clearly there's some data, there's some middleware doing funny things, including with the physical space, the computing continuum, and then you have the users and applications. It's a little bit like Lego, and it's not because I didn't do this slide, but I did my PhD with Lego. But it's the same idea that you have something which is similar for all systems, the stud. And then you can put different, you can put a yellow or you can put a red, depending on what you need today. It's not always going to be easy, but you can do it. And this is what Rotterdam has done. So they're now building this together, and again, they're not doing it in isolation. They're doing it with, networks of like-minded cities, so they're learning together, not just the very local ones in the Netherlands, in Europe, also globally. So this is what the network that I also represent, we put together. It's a free membership, like the ITU, but it's very powerful if you can release that procuring power that we heard the previous speaker mention. So it's all about connecting from the bottom and the top. So it's not top down, it's not bottom up, we call it top up. And the systems need to be able to have that. A global system is not the same as a local system. I'm sure that the municipalities around your municipality have slightly different views. And that's how it should be. Because otherwise we didn't need the mayor and the council, we only needed the civil servant and the key to turn it on and off. That's not the world we want. But we want technology to keep up with that ambition, to keep local legitimate agency. And that's what we put in a standard, or at least a foundational brick. And it's valid in procurement globally in 194 states, including the Vatican and Norway. Thank you so much.